Thank you, Chairman. And I want to pick up, Secretary, on that last point you made about domestic violent extremism, because I know both DHS and the FBI have flagged domestic violent extremism as one of the top threats that we face right now. And we're talking about, homegrown extremists here who are motivated by racial or ethnic prejudice, by extremism in their politics or anti-government beliefs, by Islamophobia or anti-Semitism. But of course, it can be challenging to find and to disrupt these plots because, unfortunately, we're often talking about American citizens who have First Amendment rights as well. And so, can you just expand a little bit on INA's role in fighting domestic terrorism? What can be done to strengthen DHS's ability to counter domestic extremism? And I'll leave it open-ended like that.
Oh, no, thank you, sir. And yeah, domestic violent extremism, I think you've heard from Chris Wray and Director Wray, Secretary Marcus, and others, that just in terms of the numbers, it is the most lethal and most dangerous threat that we're dealing with right now in terms of the threat from individuals and small groups who are ideologically motivated. However, October 7th exacerbated that threat. And now you see, and I was alluding to this a little bit in the last answer, you see a little bit of a convergence of the foreign terrorist threat and sort of ideological rhetoric being picked up by some of the domestic violent extremists here in the United States, and that's kind of fully energizing that threat. In terms of what we have to do at INA to deal with that, you put your finger on what is particularly challenging, because a lot of domestic violent extremism by definition, grows out of ideology, and a lot of that ideology is politically based, and political thought, rhetoric, communication is the most centrally core protected constitutional activity there is. So it's our job to make sure that if we're focusing our collection or our intelligence and our analytical efforts on domestic violent extremism, we're not focusing on just maybe extremist discussion, extremist thought. You're allowed to be extremist in this country. That's what our country's all about. But that we're only focusing on violence. And one of the important things that I highlighted in my opening statement was, I think one of the things that I'm most sort of gratified about that we've done since we got to INA is the creation of our Transparency and Oversight Program Office, and the success that we've had with that office led by Andy Fawcett, who's here with me today, in really starting to put a program of oversight, strong program of oversight into our operations, very much because of the complexity of that challenge of making sure that we don't do anything that chills the exercise of constitutional rights.
So again, thank you for that, and that's very welcome news. On the topic again of domestic extremism, INA failed to disseminate actionable intelligence prior to the January 6th attack on this Capitol, when there were individuals, extremists, who came to this building armed with weapons, with zip ties, intending to commit acts of violence. And there was open source communication that suggested that this was not just political opinions or political extremism even, but there were individuals who were contemplating violence. So can you tell us now that INA's ability to find and disseminate information related to possible events like that has improved to the point that we can be more likely to prevent another January 6th from happening again?
Thank you. That's that's an ever-present concern for us. That a January 6th could happen again, or some other variation of it. Right? I mean, you can look at a lot of events, protests, marches, or whatever. A large part of them is constitutionally protected, is fine, but then maybe some subset of the people who are there engage in terrorism or want to use that as a cover and a pretext for terrorism. And it's very challenging. We have to make sure that we address the second, but not the first part. That's the oversight challenge that we deal with. In terms of our capability to do that, we're very focused on making sure that we don't have another situation where we have communications that suggest violence and don't get that information out to our partners. I can tell you that in the situations that I've been involved in the last 2 years where we've had an emergent situation, crisis situation, we have effectively gotten the intelligence out, both by product and by calls with our state and local partners. I've been on a number of 3,000-person calls the day that something happens to say, this is what we're seeing, so we're making sure to get that information out. Let me just mention one thing, though. If you look, my statement of the record was kind of long and dry and a little hard to read, but one part of it I think is important, which is there is a function that the government needs to do, which is reviewing the open source environment, looking for the indicia of coming violence. And that's where those indicia were seen back before January 6th. It was there. This is open source. We right now, INA, are very limited in our ability to actually access a lot of that information because of the authorities we operate under and the resources we have. The point of this is not to say that we should have those authorities or resources, but Congress should think about that. Somebody in the government needs to be sort of in a more muscular way, and obviously under all the limitations we need to protect constitutional rights, looking for that kind of threat discussion in the open source space, because that's where the next alert for the next coming crisis is going to be.
No, I think INA can play a valuable role there, and I'll yield back. I'm over time.